Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whiskey and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. In this episode, we close out Comedic Kidnapping Month with a look at Ruthless People. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and as always, please be advised that spoilers are ahead. Well, listeners, I am joined today with what may very well be the stupidest man on the face of the earth.
Hey!
That is a favorite line from today's movie that we'll be discussing, Ruthless People. How are you doing today, Whiskey?
I'm hot. There's a heat wave here in LA, and
oh, you know what
I have
makes
to
it
turn
better?
my AC off to record, so it's probably going to be a nice sweaty review.
I recommend to stay cool, you listen to that song by Glass Animals called Heat Waves on repeat.
Oh my god, I'm so sick of that song.
Oh my god, I love that song. That's like every time I get into the car and it's sticky and hot because for whatever reason we bought leather car seats. I'm just like, yeah, I'm putting that on, and that's my vibe.
I was amazed that song got so popular because I'm like, it's not bad, it's just so basic. I was like talking about it with a friend and I was like, how'd this song get so massively popular? And she was like, TikTok. Which is true. It's not bad. It's just, God, I've heard it probably 50,000 times in the last 8 months and I'm so sick of hearing it.
Well, like I know you're talking about, and you're also tired of the running up that hill.
I'm less sick of that one. That one has just been... Again, it's like because of Stranger Things, you hear it like a million times a day, and it's a good song. But if I had to be stuck in a room with a repeating song, I'd pick that over Heat Waves at this point.
Well, so like we said, today we're going to be discussing Ruthless People, and of course, per usual, we also brought along a signature cocktail for today's episode. So, Whiskey, what are you drinking?
Well, since our last episode, I was drinking white wine, and also I couldn't really think of a good cocktail to go with this movie. Again, every time we watch something that I haven't seen before, I'm like waiting, like, oh, maybe they have a drink that happens. But I just figured, let's go with red wine, and partly because of the colorful cast of characters in this film, I decided to go with a Freak Show Cabernet Sauvignon Blanc.
That is a perfect name. I love that.
This is, it's a very goofy wine bottle. It's made in Ojai, California, which for anyone who has never heard of Ojai, it's like the hippiest town in California. It is very neat. I've actually never been there, but I have several friends from there, and there's a lot of like personalities on the internet and stuff that come from there. Like there's that one famous commercial for the taxidermy guy. Nope. Do you know what I mean? The guy that's like, oh, there's a deer driving that car. Nope. It's just Glenn Testa. That guy's from Ojai. But yeah, so Freak Show Cabernet Sauvignon Blanc, and this one is called Strongest Man on Earth. And the winemaker put his name on here. It's a Michael David joint. Apparently.
So the real question is, after taking a sip, are you feeling strong?
It better be the strongest wine in the world.
Uh-oh, that doesn't bode well for our opinions today.
No. That makes it sound worse than I actually feel about the film. But what are you drinking?
So I was looking for a cocktail. I was going to do one called Ruthless, but I didn't have the stuff to make it. So I found another one that I think is perfect for this, and it's called Suffering Bastard.
Whoa, that's cool. What's in that?
So this is bourbon, gin, lime juice, bitters, and ginger ale.
Oof. I'm not usually a fan of gin, but I like the name of the cocktail, and I'm a sucker for funny named things, as you can tell from my wine. I'm going to correct myself before I make myself sound an idiot. I sound like an idiot. I said it was a Cabernet Sauvignon Blanc, but that, I think, would make it a white wine. It's just Cabernet Sauvignon. So yeah. It is a
Blanc,
deep red, tasty wine.
Blanc is French, I think, for white. So
exactly.
That does make sense. Okay, so to get right into the movie today, because it is a fun one. So we have Ruthless People from 1986. It is directed by Jim Abrahams, David Zucker, and Jerry Zucker. It's written by Dale Launer, and this was his debut This is his debut screenplay, and this was also the last movie in which Jim Abrahams, David Zucker, and Jerry Zucker worked together as a directing.
Yeah.
Starring Danny DeVito as Sam Stone, Bette Midler as Barbara Stone, Judge Reinhold as Ken Kessler, Helen Slater as Sandy Kessler, Anita, I think this is, I can't read my handwriting, so everyone take a shot because that happens every episode I host. I think it's Anita
If you
Morris.
say so.
As Carol Dodworth, Bill Pullman in his movie debut as Earl Mott, and William G. Schilling as Police Chief Henry Benton. So, first thing that I want to share with you is this was a box office smash. This was a big success. It was basically done on a very frugal budget, and it ended up, making many times back. So the budget for this movie was between 9 and 13 million.
Gotcha.
And the box
office, for 86, that's not a lot, but that's not the cheapest. I mean, around the same time, you had I always talk about slasher films, and they usually were shot for a million. So not bad.
It's not a shoestring budget by any means.
Well, considering the all-star cast, that's actually pretty surprising. So I guess a lot of them probably, didn't charge as much as they normally would have.
Right. And this ended up making almost $72 million at the box office. This was a big success for, at the time, this was actually the last film released under the Touchstone Films name, which, if you don't know, that was Disney's adult-oriented films.
It was for and I mean, that's actually surprising because, I mean, there are other Touchstone films after this, like Who Framed Roger Rabbit and some other things. So that's...
Correction. They are Touchstone Pictures.
I see. Okay.
They reorganized after this film.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I was even in the 90s, I remember seeing Touchstone Pictures as a kid at the theater. So I was like, that can't be right. Okay, right. So
that's kind of like one of those gotcha trivia questions you can keep in your back pocket. Okay, so first off, I want to go with what this is a movie that it's been around in my life for a long time. So the first thing I want to go with is I enjoyed this movie. What did you think? Is this your first time watching this? What were your first impressions?
So it is. I will say, watching it, I would have been surprised that it was a box office smash if Amazon hadn't said the blockbuster comedy. Yeah. Since they used that word, I was like, oh, okay, I guess this was successful. If I hadn't read that, I would have been kind of surprised. I would have assumed that a lot of people would have seen it because of, Danny DeVito and Bette Midler and a bunch of the other people in the film. I'm wondering if do you know anything about the directors of the film?
I do. I was actually going to quiz you on that. They are the same directors who brought us, most famously, Airplane. And I had the other two written down. I think one of them was
Naked Gun, Top Secret.
There was Kentucky Fried Chicken. That was another one that they did.
It's interesting. I didn't realize this was that successful. There was a point where they kind of fell off and left Hollywood, and it's sort of, I guess it would have happened in the 90s, so it should have been after this movie. But that was the thing. They got famous with Airplane. They continued to make the Naked Gun movies, which were really, or the Police Squad.
That was
Naked
the other
Gun
one,
movies
Police Squad.
That were.
Okay.
I said it already, but I guess you didn't hear me. But yeah, so they made 3 of those, all which were successful. They did Top Secret, which wasn't as successful, but I think it's pretty good. But yeah, as they went on, eventually they kind of, got less popular, I guess, and sort of stopped making movies. And I wasn't sure if it was going to be this one, but now that I think about it, it's Naked Gun 3 came out in 92, so it would have had to have been after that before they got chased out of Hollywood. But the interesting, I was pleasantly surprised when I saw their names, because I am familiar with them, and I was like, wait, this is a Zucker Brothers movie?
Yep.
Okay. I knew it was a comedy because we're kind of doing dark comedies for these 2 episodes. This went straight into the title sequence with a catchy song and a animated sort of title sequence.
That was a super cute title sequence.
It was pretty good. But yeah, like, so I was like, oh, this is a Zucker Brothers movie. And yeah, I kind of went in with certain expectations. I feel like if you go in thinking this is by the Airplane people, you're going to be surprised at what kind of movie this is, because most of their comedy is usually visual gags. Yeah. And this is much more of like a straight, I guess you'd call it a screwball comedy. Mm-hmm. Like, you know, it's just a cast of characters with the stakes consistently getting higher and higher, with them all making horrible mistakes and things getting more and more complicated. And that was weird to me, like, not to the point of it being bad, but like, I did find one visual gag in the movie that I wrote down. At one point, Danny DeVito's talking to the police at like a country club. Yeah. And out of focus in the background, you can see a fully uniformed police officer playing tennis. Yeah. And it's like a blink if you miss it. And that's kind of normally what their movies are. Like, famously, it's like there's either a gag going on, or if there's story stuff going on, there's a gag in the background.
Right.
So like, if you've seen Airplane or anything, you'll know what I'm talking about, where throughout the entire movie, there's always a joke on screen. And that wasn't really the case with this. Right. This was much more character-driven comedy. And I think, honestly, like, I don't love this movie, but I think its strength lies in the acting and the writing. Right. This didn't make me laugh super hard at points, but it was funny. It's one of those where it's like, I'm just so desensitized that it's like, I'll be like, oh, that's funny, but it won't make me laugh.
No, I get you.
It's Bette Midler and Danny DeVito right at the beginning, like, they're the best. Everyone does a good job. They are the best thing in the movie. Both of them are incredibly hilarious. Danny DeVito is essentially playing Frank Reynolds from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, years before he would play that character. It's always trippy seeing him young too. I'm so used to seeing him old that it's like seeing him in his 40s. It's like, whoa.
I need to watch Taxi with you.
Yeah, no. Well, and that's extra fun too, because that's where he met his wife.
I thought he met his wife on Cheers.
No, it was on Taxi.
It was on Taxi? Okay.
It was on Taxi because they were both regular stars on it. And
right.
Yeah, like, his wife is like one of the other regular characters. I didn't even know either of them were on Cheers. So
yeah, Rhea Perlman. Yeah, she was
she was. That's the problem. I'm not familiar with a lot of her work. When I see her in something, I recognize her, but I can't, you know, unlike Danny DeVito, I can like pick out a bunch of movies or things that he's been in, but her, even though she's had just as big of a career as him, right. I guess it's just the stuff she's been in. I can't really think of, like, the movie I think of when I think of Rhea Perlman is Matilda, which he directed.
Yeah.
That must have been fun. He actually got to act like a jerk with his wife.
She was the sassy, or not sassy, but smart-mouthed waitress at Cheers with like the curly hair. Yeah,
gotcha.
That's where I first saw Rhea Perlman. But you know, you're absolutely right about, you know, this being a different sort of Zucker movie. Like you said, they're more known for, I think I saw somebody on a website had called it saying like a gag a second.
Literally, again, like, and I know you like some of their movies. Like, next time you watch Airplane, literally just like, every time there's a new shot, like, see if you can find the gag, because that was their mentality. It's like, always there's going to be something funny on screen,
right?
Like, if there's story stuff going on, if they're talking about, like, you know, the plot or the background information or whatever, in the background there'll be something funny going on. And then if there's nothing funny going on in the background, there'll be like a funny thing happening on screen. And that's usually kind of the way, at least their most popular comedies went. Like, I'm sure that obviously this one was very successful, but I feel like more people, like, if you were to walk up to a stranger on the street and say Ruthless People or Airplane, I feel like more people would probably know Airplane over this movie. Right. I'd never heard of this. I was surprised to see it was a Zucker Brothers movie.
See, when you fall into my weird collection of movies, you never know what you're gonna find.
Yeah, right. Well, again, it was interesting. Like, when I read the premise going in, I was like, oh, that sounds funny. It's also like, I wouldn't say it. Like, there's been other movies about someone kidnapping their spouse and actually not wanting them, you know, to be
right,
to be returned. So it wasn't like a new thing I'd heard, but it's like, it's always kind of, I mean, you can make it dramatic, but it is kind of a funny way of going about something. The other thing I'm not surprised about is that the budget wasn't too high, because one thing I've learned about you doing this show for 3 years at this point is that, like, between the two of us, you're more into television.
Mm-hmm.
You're more like the television fan. You're more into that sort of realm of filmmaking. And this felt like a TV show more than, and not as an insult, but it felt less cinematic in that there wasn't a lot of like moving shots or anything. The sets were very basic.
Right.
There weren't a lot of locations. Like the strength, as I said earlier, the strengths in this movie were in the acting and the writing. And in that same vein, it's kind of like television, where it's like the people in the project are the ones doing the heavy lifting. Like, you're not going to spend a lot of money on television, like with sets or anything, at least in the era where this was made. So, you know, that's kind of what it felt like. It's not, I'm not saying like, oh, it's not real cinema or anything like that. I'm just saying, kind of
TV people. Whiskey says you are a lesser genre. No, I'm playing. He loves TV too.
No. But, well, especially now, you can't say that. Nowadays, TV shows have the same production value as movies. But yeah, this felt like a sitcom that was 90 minutes long, which isn't a bad thing. It's just kind of noticeable, and different movies have different strengths. And I feel like if you like more visual sort of comedies, this probably isn't going to be your deal. This is much more of like a... as I said, it essentially is a sitcom. Like, if you really boil it down, like, again, it's characters in a situation and comedy ensues. That's literally what a sitcom is.
Right. Well, and like I said, this one's much more a comedy of errors.
Well, because there is the one character who is the dumbest man in the world, but all the characters are kind of stupid in their own ways. To the point where, again, it's like this never made me laugh out loud, but there are some really funny setups. I feel like if I saw this as like a kid, although that's the problem, right? Like, this is rated R. I was curious about that until the nudity
well, there was that,
showed
and then
up,
there was
until they whipped them out.
Yeah.
That's when I was like, oh,
and the
okay,
language.
so this is
that
probably
and
not
the
for
language.
kids. Yeah.
But I mean, it's not as bad as like now, where, you know, they basically use it as a sentence enhancer.
Trigger warning.
So what's interesting is, I love how you were like, I didn't think this was, I was surprised to know this was a Zucker movie. So they were actually handpicked for this project by Michael Eisner.
Oh my God. Yeah, that's right. Michael Eisner was in charge of Disney by now. And so that is... He had worked with them previously when he was at Paramount. So he was familiar with their work. And so he told them, he's like, listen, makes sense.
I know you normally write your own material, but I have a really good script here, and I think you guys are great for it. So I guess they went over, they read the script, they loved the script, and they decided to make it. But I just think that's just so interesting, because like, this is not what I think of with the Zucker movies. And I guess maybe the fact that it wasn't one that they had written is why it's so different, for at least, you know, for you.
I mean, it felt different because of their style of comedy. But thinking about it, the other thing that they're kind of known for with their bigger movies is that they do genre parodies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Airplane was making fun of disaster movies. The Police Squad was police procedurals.
Yeah. There was a Naked Gun.
I don't know if you ever saw it. Yeah, exactly. And Top Secret, I don't know if you ever saw that, but it was making fun of kind of like 60s spy movies.
See, this is back when the parodies were fun and not mean. Because I don't know if you you remember, also, like in like the early 2000s, we went through this parody phase where it was like disaster movie, epic movie, or whatever, and they were just all bad and kind of mean.
It wasn't just that they were mean. The problem, and I've brought this up with other films we've reviewed, and for instance, I like to watch Red Letter Media, and they've talked at length about those movies. And pretty much, I mean, the consensus, it's not just that they were mean, it's that they were not timeless. They are making jokes based on things that were going on at the time. Yeah. You know, like if you put on Epic Movie, there's like a bunch of Michael Jackson jokes, and there's like jokes based on like music videos that were happening you know what I mean? It's like it automatically dates it, and it's not funny because no one would know what they're talking about by today's standards.
Right.
You know, like, in fact, like I remember one of the movies was like Date Movie, and the joke was like Allison Hannigan's in a fat suit, and they're playing like My Milkshake Brings All the Boys to the Yard, and it's like, I think a lot of people might still know about that song, but it's kind of like what's funny about this? She's fat.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like the jokes for sure were mean spirited, but I think the bigger problem was that it was a scam. You know, I'm going to bring this up because it's getting close to Halloween, and I'm noticing a lot of scary movies are coming out. And any other horror fans who listen to the show might know what I'm talking about. But this is where you really gotta sniff out the good movies, because horror especially has this problem where it's like a carnival barker rolls into town, and they're like, "Hear ye, hear ye, like come, hurry, come and see the newest spooky movie." And you know, it's they make trailers with like audience reactions and all this other stuff. And then you go and see the movie and it sucks. And then it's out of the theaters by that first weekend, but it's made like twice its budget.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what those parody movies were, but for comedy. It's like, you know, they make a trailer that's going to get a lot of your average moviegoers to want to go see it because it's like, oh, it's making fun of the thing that I think is funny.
Yeah.
And then they go and see it. It's not funny. And then it's out of theaters by the next weekend.
Right.
And that's... yeah, thank goodness. But that's the thing. Like, you could watch Airplane now and not be. It doesn't like date itself. None of the jokes have anything to do with like pop culture of the time period.
And I think even when they do reference pop culture, the joke itself is standalone funny that you don't even have to understand the reference to find it funny.
Well, exactly. Like when I think of like jokes from Airplane, it's like the guy talking to the woman and he goes into a flashback, and then when the flashback's over, her feet are hanging next to him like she's committed suicide because she wouldn't stop talking. You don't need to, like, that's just funny, you know? You don't need to, like, it's not like I don't even know what to compare it to. Again, it's not based on some thing that was funny at the time.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, it's just funny. And that's why their parody movies don't even really feel like parody movies. Like, you don't really... Again, like, part of it was that the disaster movie thing was sort of over when Airplane was over, but also, like, the Naked Gun movies, you know, it's not like you need to even really know what a police procedural is. It's like, oh, it's goofy cops. That's what's going on. And this isn't even like a parody movie. This is just like a funny situation. I do kind of wish that, even though, and it makes sense that they didn't write the script, again, because it seemed like they kind of liked doing parody movies, but I do sort of wish that they had done more of their visual gags in the background.
Yeah, that would have been something that I think that especially with as many phone calls as they had in the movie, I feel like that's something that could have easily been worked in.
Exactly. I think maybe that was probably a budget thing, because especially knowing there was, again, a lot of these people were big names. You know, Bette Midler and Danny DeVito for sure, but Judge Reinhold was like a big TV star at the time, unless I'm mistaken, and like a bunch of the supporting cast I'm blanking on, and you listed everyone at the beginning, but like everyone was famous from something.
Well, like Bill Pullman, like I said, this was his first role, and he was so great in it that he actually went on to have a career.
Right?
Really? So this was his first... No, sorry, not first. A first movie role. Like, I think he'd done like one or two things on TV as like a supporting character on, like, I think he was on Cagney and Lacey, like in an episode. But this was like his first, you know, movie role. And so I actually kind of find that kind of hilarious, because, you know, Bill Pullman is kind of just like, I don't know, he has, well, at least for us, you know, basically kind of always been there in the lexicon of famous actors. And then just see, like, you know, he started out here playing the dumbest man on the face of the earth, or the stupidest man on the face of the earth.
Wait, okay. You sent me a clip from Moonlighting.
Yes.
Is that Bill Pullman? Is that why you sent that to me?
No, that is not Bill Pullman.
Okay, you might as well, I brought it up. You might as well, because I'm still curious why you sent it. Before we recorded this, T sent me this like 2-minute clip from a Moonlighting show that maybe some of you have never heard of, but it was big in the 80s.
It's a great show. Everybody should watch it. So yes,
And I assumed it was going to be like the plot was going to have something to do with it, or maybe there was an actor from it or something. But watching it, I could not figure out why you sent it to me. So what's the relevance?
So this is kind of like a kind of fun fact, and I did not realize this until I was watching the movie this time for the podcast, and I have no idea why. I have never made this connection before. So I sent you a clip from the beginning of the pilot of Moonlighting, and I sent you that clip specifically so you could see the setting. That is the same house. They use the same house as the Stone Mansion in Ruthless People and as her house on the show. And I always thought, and I just thought that was kind of wild because it's an actual house that somebody owns, but how they drastically redressed it between, like, I don't know, 3 or 4 months, you know, because I know when that was filmed and I know when this movie was filmed. And I wanted to show you because I kind of wanted to give you kind of the best view of the house I could show you. So that was kind of more of a fun fact sort of thing. I was hoping
that makes sense.
You would pick up on it.
They did a good job. I think part of it was because it had been a few days. And also when I'm thinking of scenes from the movie, I'm usually thinking of like Bette Midler in the basement, or like, you know, they jump around locations a lot. And for some reason that big fancy house doesn't stand out in my memory as much, but they did a good job redressing it. But that also kind of goes back to what I was saying about it felt like a television production. Obviously it's a real house that they, you know, rented out from someone or maybe a real estate company or whatever. But that's kind of what I mean, where it's like, it felt like it was produced more like a TV show than a movie. Although I will say I was very impressed with it's funny nowadays. A lot of productions are moving away from LA. Like, it felt like every movie for decades was either set in Los Angeles or New York City. Mm-hmm. And this one, they really tried to pull out all the stops for all the famous LA locations. Yeah. There's a payphone call right out in front of Beverly Center, actually at Beverly Park, which used to be like a little amusement park.
Oh.
Right where Beverly Center is. That hot dog thing actually was in the news recently. The hot dog stand he's in front of.
I recognized that hot dog stand, and I couldn't place it.
It's an iconic, like, LA landmark. It's controversial because it's not the same hot dog stand, but they put a new one up in West Hollywood, and it's like right outside where the Doors production recording studio was. Yeah. But because of that, I noticed the hot dog, and I was like, hey, that was in the news recently. They go to Santa Monica Pier. Mm-hmm. They go to a bunch of places. Mulholland Drive, like up where, you know, supposedly he's going to murder his wife and they're blackmailing him and stuff. It's like basically every single LA landmark is in this film. And I don't know if permits were as expensive as they are now back then, but I'm guessing a big chunk of the budget was like really capitalizing on the fact that this takes place in LA.
Well, yeah, actually, I think I read that in one of their interviews, and they said, you know, we were able to make this. What did one of the Zucker brothers said? You know, we had this great script, and we didn't even have to leave town. That's exactly what he said.
There you go. I mean, it's kind of perfect to. Out of all the cities you could, I mean, maybe Las Vegas is another one, but as far as the kind of story this is telling, I wouldn't be too surprised if something like this actually happened in town.
So you've talked about how, you know, you didn't realize this was going to be a big success. Well, apparently neither did Bette Midler and Danny DeVito. I was reading, and apparently after they went to the premiere of the movie, you know, they had a call and they were just like, hey, you know, great work, you know, movie's cool, whatever. And then like 20 minutes later, one of them called each other back, and then they just started like having a nervous breakdown about how they just ruined their career and the movie was awful. So I just love that they didn't think the movie was any good.
I mean, at least Bette Midler was a musician.
That's true. She's like to fall back on.
She could still release music. Exactly. Well, and also, it's like Danny DeVito. It's funny that they both thought that, too. It's like, thinking about it, Danny DeVito was still on a couple of TV shows at the time, so unless they just decided to fire him, you know.
Yeah, they're like, and we've had enough of you, Mr. DeVito. Bye.
We saw Ruthless People, and your performance was so god-awful that you're off the show. We're killing off your character. You're being digitally removed from all classic films that you're being on. Tim Burton hasn't even made Batman yet, and he has no intentions of hiring you as the Penguin.
And you haven't even heard of Big Fish yet, but you're not in it.
Yeah, it's just like funny that, because again, I do not hate this movie. I don't think it's one of my new favorites or anything. This is it's good. It's not, at least in my opinion, it's not great,
but it's good.
But it's really good. And where it stands out for me is the performances. Again, like, it's funny that Danny DeVito would think that, because this is the type of character he really excels in playing.
Yeah.
And on paper, it is exactly the same character as the character he plays in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. He's a rich jerk who will murder his own family to get money. Yeah. Like, he is a terrible human being.
Well,
with no moral compass. And it's like, again, like, he's great at playing those characters, but he's famous for playing those characters. So I'm not surprised that he excelled in this. And Bette Midler was great in this too. And it's funny because just a few years later, I don't know how many other movies she's been in, but I know, no. She, I think a year or two after this, she would be in Oliver and Company, the Disney Oliver Twist movie with the talking animals.
Oh,
she plays like a poodle.
That's right. I forgot about. I haven't seen that in years.
She plays a poodle and she sings a really good song. And then a few years after that, she ended up working with Disney quite a bit. Hocus Pocus came out and she was in that and got to sing a song.
Well, and then of course, she was in Beaches in 1988, and that's a classic. I'm trying to think. She was also in The First Wives Club. That was a big hit.
Yes.
Yes. So yeah, she's had a pretty steady acting career, but like you said, but you're watching it and you're like it wasn't great, but it was good. I'm just like, I'm kind of wondering if that was just more like actors being actors and having second guessing the choices they made in life.
Possibly. It's just interesting to me that they felt that way, because I would not have thought this movie would have bombed. I would have, like, at my worst expectations, I would have thought that this would have just broken even. But I didn't think it was a terrible movie by any stretch of the imagination. It was quite fine, actually.
I was thinking, and this is more of an observation on my part, but I was thinking about the title, and I know they talk about how those the two kidnappers, played by Judge and Helen, needed to be ruthless. And I'm like, but it's called Ruthless People, but it's not just really about them. So I was trying to think about this. And so I've decided that it's about the two of them trying to be ruthless and failing. Because he even tries to be ruthless later in the movie when he's trying to upsell that guy in that speaker set. And then his pregnant wife or girlfriend comes in. He's like, let me show you the bargain stuff. Because he was just too nice to be ruthless. And then we have Danny DeVito, who is ruthless in the way he's trying to get rid of his wife. And then we have the other couple, which is Bill Pullman and I can't think of her name right now, but basically Danny DeVito's mistress, ruthless on accident. So what do you think?
So I agree with you. I think you're going for what I was going to say. I think the title, I thought it was funny when they actually said "We're Ruthless People" out loud, because I'm like, oh, there's the trailer moment. There's the bit where they put it in the trailer to get the title or like the bit where you point at the screen and go, they said it. No, but it's ironic that the two people Judge Reinhold's the one who on the phone, he's like, we're ruthless people, we'll do anything. In my opinion, every character in the film except them are the ruthless people, because everyone else has some kind of plot going on. The police chief is cheating on his wife. The mistress of Danny DeVito is blackmailing him.
On accident, though.
That was...
She doesn't...
No. That was setting up... she was planning on... She's blackmailing the chief of police on accident, yes. But she was trying to blackmail Danny DeVito. So at least... Not that Danny DeVito is a saint, but it's like, okay, you're trying to get money from a rich guy by sleeping with him and then blackmailing him. You're ruthless. Yeah. So in my opinion, they're ruthless. To an extent, his wife is ruthless, even though she's not like an evil character. You know, she's ruthless in her revenge against him. Like, every character except that really nice couple who kidnaps the wife are ruthless. And for me, that was like an ironic kind of thing. Like, oh, they're ruthless people, but really the movie,
like, yeah, but like for the, yeah, because
everyone else is ruthless. But
I mean,
them.
right, that actually, I think you're right with the way you phrase it, because it is ironic, because the non-ruthless people are the people that, except for, you know, his, I'm assuming soon to be ex-wife, comes out on top.
Well, and the reason I, you know, think that also is because you can be ruthless to someone who deserves it.
Right.
It's not about necessarily targeting innocent people. You can be ruthless in, you know, your revenge or your planning or something.
Right.
Know? So at least that's the way I interpreted it. And I thought it was kind of, again, like meant to be comically ironic. Like, oh, the big evil kidnappers are just a couple of sweethearts who are trying to get what is owed to them after being screwed over by Danny DeVito. And ironically, everyone else they're playing against is more ruthless than they are.
I mean, but that scene at the end, though, is so hilarious when he shows up in that stupid clown mask.
Oh.
And then Bill Pullman pulls up, "I'm robbing you."
Who said that?
That whole sequence, though, I think is pretty hilarious, and that is always the part.
Oh,
there's two parts I've always remembered of this movie. There's that part, and then there's the part where, after they know that he needs Bette Midler to be alive, and they're pretending to torture her with the meat on the stove.
Yeah, No, the bit that was pretty close to making me laugh was definitely the police standoff where they're telling him, like, drop the case and move away from him, and he's just, who said that? The police! We're surrounded! He's the stupidest man in the world who cannot even tell that the cops are closing in on our... And that, too, I also loved the big fake-out ending where you think that he kills himself, but then it's like, oh, although I had almost forgotten, because earlier in the film there's a serial killer, what is it, the bedroom killer yeah. Or something, and he dies falling down the stairs, and I was like, oh, this is going to come up later somewhere, and it was just long enough that I forgot until the body showed up, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's what they did with them. But
so this is a movie that I like for the fact that, like, it ties up all of its ends, basically. And just the fact the bedroom killer turns up later and it's like the perfect thing, because nobody will look any further into this kidnapping thing when it's this guy. It's just like, I like movies, I mean, not all the time, but I guess I'll say I really appreciate movies where, you know, they have a lot of loose ends out there, and they always tie them together into a nice little bow at the end. Because I think, and you know, I'm not a professional screenwriter, but when I've tried to write, to me, that is like one of the most difficult things to do without it seeming very forced. And it all kind of just seems organic. Does that make sense?
No, I know what you mean. This is a really tight comedic script. And part of the reason I feel that way is, like, I think this was cast perfectly. Mm-hmm. But it was written in such a way that a lot of different people could have played the parts. And, like, I talk about setup and payoff a lot, but what you're talking about is kind of exactly what that's meant for. Things like having the bedroom killer, you know, show up and then die from falling down the stairs, and then leaving that thread, like, oh, what did they do with the body? And then having it show up at the end. The whole bit set up before about how Judge Reinhold's wife was a fashion designer for Danny DeVito, and he stole her skirts mm-hmm. from her. And then it's like, oh, Bette Midler, Danny DeVito's wife, is really into her fashion, and it's like, oh, I'm going to, put in the money for you to make your own clothing line. Even stuff like, my philosophy, whether it's comedy or not, just as far as screenwriting or writing in general goes, is the art of storytelling is when you reveal critical information to the audience. And it's especially important in comedies. And one bit that, again, got me nearly close to laughing is early on, there's the whole funny bit with the blackmail where the stupid guy is supposedly filming Danny DeVito killing his wife. But the audience knows, oh no, it's some dude just having like very rough sex in their car with someone. And I love how, especially when Danny DeVito is dealing with the police, how long it takes for them to reveal that's the chief of police. Yeah. That was close to making me laugh because for the whole movie, you're like, I wonder who is this guy? Like, he looks, it's like some older man or whatever. But that phone call where she's like, oh, for some reason, no. She had just sent the video tape in to the chief of police because she sent it to Danny DeVito. And he's like, oh, yeah, you want me to do that to you? Because that's the other thing, too. Neither of them had even watched the tape because they're like, oh, it's murder. I can't watch this. But yeah, that bit where she sends it to the chief of police. And that's the first time in the movie since the scene where you've even seen that guy and that realization that it's like, oh my God. Of all the people, it had to be him. It's great. And there's lots of moments like that.
What I loved about that
throughout
reveal,
the movie,
when it was him, wasn't just the reveal, but it was also the fact they picked like the most wholesome looking grandfatherly actor ever. And then
for the chief of police.
For the chief of police, and then you see what he's doing and you're just like, oh my God. I thought that kind of juxtaposition was pretty funny too.
It is pretty funny, especially like the fact that their shenanigans are so loud and aggressive that it sounds like he's murdering her.
Right?
Like,
that was a whole sequence that was just hilarious to sit through. Now, I know earlier you had mentioned, there's been like other movies that have done this, and you're right, there's two that I could think of off the top of my head, and those two and this one I'm pretty sure are all tied into a third thing that'll lead to another topic.
Okay.
So this movie has a similar plot to a 1959 British comedy called Too Many Crooks, where
I like the title. Right? Good wordplay.
I mean, if you think about it, this movie could very easily have been called that too. And basically, in that one just focuses on the kidnapping though, and the guy doesn't want her back, and so they basically, I forget if they return her without the rant. No, I'm thinking something else. Basically, they had to figure out what to do with the wife because her husband doesn't want her. And then another similar movie was 2013's Life of Crime. And that one was kind of the same thing. That one's more of a drama, though, from what I've read. It's still classified as a comedy, but they said it's more dramatic than like this one is. And again, it's the same thing. They kidnap somebody's wife, and they decide. And he was getting ready to divorce her anyway, so he was like, "No, I don't care, keep her." And what happens with that? This story keeps coming up with this movie, and I'm kind of wondering if all these three movies had sort of the same source material. I don't know if you've heard of a short story or maybe it's a novel, I forget, by O. Henry called The Ransom of Red Chief.
I've heard of the book. I've never read it.
So basically, it's essentially the embodiment of that meme that you've seen online when it's like kidnappers return.
Let me interject. For anyone who doesn't know, T pronounces meme as mem. So if you're like, what's a mem? He means meme. Continue.
What I mean is y'all need to get on my level. Anyway, it's basically the embodiment of that whole thing which you've seen where it's like that guy from The Simpsons being thrown through the window, and it was like kidnappers returning me after, talking nonstop about or whatever. Essentially, they kidnap this rich guy's kid, and he's so obnoxious that they end up returning him. The father doesn't want to pay the ransom, and they end up returning the kid and not taking the ransom.
Gotcha. Now that I think that is actually, that's not how it ends up with Bette Midler, but now that you mention it, it's like, that actually is kind of a common story, the idea of the hostage being so insufferable that the kidnappers can't even deal with them. That I have seen that before, both in comedies and in dramas and stuff. The one, it doesn't exactly, I wouldn't say it matches up perfectly with this, but I'm surprised you didn't mention it as Fargo.
Elaborate.
Well, okay, so you haven't seen Fargo, right?
That is correct. Although apparently, inside joke, it's a lot like Letterkenny.
Sort of. The comedy kind of is. Like, so I'm going to keep it short just partly because it could be something we review in the future, but the setup is that a husband hires two men to kidnap his wife because his wife's father is rich and doesn't like him very much. So he's ransoming his wife for his father-in-law's money.
Right.
So that's all I'll say about that in case we review it in the future, but that was also kind of a similar setup. I wouldn't say it's exactly one-to-one with this one, but it reminded me of that as well. It's not a... There's a reason police look into loved ones whenever there's a murder or a kidnapping.
Right.
Because this isn't very uncommon. And especially with kidnappings, it's like, especially if your spouse is in on it, if you fake... In fact, you're into true crime. Wasn't there a recent kidnapping where it turned out the lady was just hiding? I feel like recently on the news in like Florida or somewhere, there was like some wealthy white blonde woman who had been missing for a while, and then it turned out she was just faking her kidnapping. I feel like I saw that on the news recently, but
recently the one that I'm remembering, and maybe I'm just out of the circuit, but I'm remembering it was some kid that decided to hide under his stairs for like 5 days or something. Like, stupid.
Ground that kid into oblivion if I was his dad. But anyway, yeah, so like this isn't an uncommon thing, both for stories and for real life. Like, there's a reason police first look into the close circle of loved ones before anything else. So
no, exactly.
But yeah, you said that was going to lead into another topic. What did you?
So, because I want to talk about this writer because it's interesting. So this was written by Dan Launer. Now he's been interviewed a few times about this, and a lot of times people have pointed out the similarities between his script and The Ransom of Red Chief. And he claims, no, it was not inspired by The Ransom of Red Chief. And then later he says, well, I read O. Henry as a kid, but I didn't remember it that well. Well, first off, way to flex on us. I was not reading O. Henry as a kid. But, you know, I don't know if I necessarily believe him. But I can't say anything substantial. You know what I mean?
So we talked about this back when we reviewed that erotic film Paprika. But my thing is, like, if you're going to suggest that like similarities are straight up plagiarism, it's going to get very nitpicky. Yeah. Like, I believe him. I don't think, and even with what we just said, this is not an uncommon story. So just making a story about someone's wife getting kidnapped and them not caring about it, or the kidnap victim being obnoxious and no one wants to keep them around, like, this isn't a new idea. And just like with Paprika, with the whole going into people's dreams is not a new idea. Right. Where for me it becomes plagiarism is when it is like blatant. You know what I mean? Characters are the same.
I do not mean he plagiarized. I think basically what I'm trying to say is he was more inspired than he's letting on. Like, this was not a fresh idea to him, is what I'm trying to say.
I will say, my tinfoil hat is on in one area, and that's that his wife is a redhead.
Oh my god!
Symbolism,
right?
Maybe
this is literally how he feels about her. No,
I'm kind of half joking because I feel like that's how film theories are these days. It's like some innocuous little detail, and that's proof. It's proof that it was based on The Ransom of Red Chief. Her hair is red. You know, her hair is red because it's Bette Midler and she's a redhead. Although, I mean, hey, maybe that's why they cast it. Also, like, that's the other thing too. It's like the director, well, the casting director casted everybody, and the directors. I don't know. I'm kind of, I never read O. Henry as a kid, not because I'm better, but just because I was too busy reading Goosebumps and The Magic Treehouse or whatever I was reading.
Okay, you seriously never read The Gift of the Magi?
No, actually, but I know the story.
Okay.
That one has. Speaking of O. Henry stories that have been adapted into oblivion, that one, it's like every freaking Christmas special has a version of the Gift of the Magi. Like, I've never read it, but I know the story because it's so overdone, and that's probably why.
O. Henry was a master of irony. Even in the, like, we have the irony of the fact that they both bought gifts for each other for the thing that they no longer have because they sold it to get gifts for each other. And then, just speaking about the ransom of Red Chief, the irony of them kidnapping somebody that nobody wants.
Exactly. But there you go. You know what I mean? It's like, if you're going to say this, it probably was inspired by it. But as far as plagiarism goes, it's kind of like, if you're gonna say this is plagiarism, then you got to go after Mickey's Once Upon a Christmas for his one bit.
I do not think he plagiarized. I just think he doesn't want to admit he was inspired, but he did.
Well, so for instance, like, I didn't know the Gift of the Magi was O. Henry. It's just one of those classic stories. So that's one of those things where he might have even been like somewhat aware of the ransom of Red Chief, but not knowing where it came from, or just have it being subconsciously in the back of his head. Again, like, it's just annoying to me when people, it's like, oh, this is sort of similar to, like, I guarantee to any of those people, it's like, write a script you think or a book or anything that you think is 100% original.
And it is not.
It's not going to be. Like, I mean, even like, I'm pretty sure teachers still use this, and maybe your teachers used it, but turnitin.com, right? It's like, the point is not, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's like, and for anyone who's dumb enough to plagiarize their essays in school, most teachers these days, they'll put the essay on turnitin.com, and it cross-references with, like, every internet-based, like, published work, other essays that have been, put into the system or whatever, and checks to see how plagiarized it is. Now, the thing is, no matter what, your paper is going to be some percentage of plagiarized, because it's just, it's impossible not to be.
Statistically, your number will come up.
Yeah, the thing is, like, as a teacher, it's like when it's up to like 90% or something, that's when there's some fishiness going on. Like, most likely your essay is probably going to be like 40 to 50% plagiarized. That's normal. But once it's like in the high percentages, that's when it's like, okay,
let's take another look at this.
Exactly. And that's kind of the way I see, like, fictional media too. It's like, sorry, no matter what idea you think is completely original, someone has done it
before you, and probably better. No, I'm just kidding.
or differently. I mean, that's the thing too. Like, that's my feeling with remakes too. It's like, just do it differently.
Right.
Like, if in 50 years a new version of Lord of the Rings came out, just do it differently. Like, if there's a way you could tell the story that's,
I'm surprised no one has made an adaptation of Lord of the Rings that is literally just people trying to get across town before a store closes so they can return their purchase.
I think they could do that. It's just probably wouldn't take 3 movies. But like, an even better example is superheroes. Like, I've said in the past, like, I grew up with comic books and stuff, but Spider-Man and Batman have been rebooted so many times, and most people don't get upset about it, because it's like, okay, how are you telling the story differently from the last person?
Right.
And if it is done in a unique way, most people aren't going to be bothered by it. So that's kind of the same thing with this. It's like, frankly, I wasn't really familiar with the
Ransom of Red Chief.
The Red Chief thing. Ransom of Red Chief. But now that you bring it up, it's like, oh yeah, that is a pretty common type of story. But I don't think, oh wow, Fargo plagiarized this movie or something. Or this movie plagiarized.
I had to input a little bit of drama in here to keep things juicy. But going back to Dale Launer, he did do, after this one, 2 major screenplays that you should be familiar with. So he was one of the writers of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Do you know what's funny? When I was watching this movie, I thought of that movie and was like, oh, that'd be a fun one to review in the future if you hadn't seen it. So that is hilarious that you bring that up, because that is a movie that came into my mind while I was watching this. And then what's the other one?
The other one is he wrote the script for My Cousin Vinny.
Okay.
So this guy, he does have some writing chops. So I just wanted to insert some drama.
Again, I don't think I don't even know why you're saying that to me. I said the two best outstanding things about this film were the acting and the writing. So I don't know what you. I ain't attacking the screenwriter.
Well, I had to input that in as a disclaimer after I was like, he was a little more inspired than he's letting on. But okay.
No, exactly.
This is where it gets where it gets juicy. So, and just a trigger warning for any people ahead. Brief discussion of mass shootings. So, this guy was friends with the family of Elliot Rodger. And
I mean, so Elliot Rodger's dad was kind of a Hollywood, like, in fact, there's some conspiracy theories that he might have been the reason a lot of YouTubers got their videos on Elliot Rodger taken down.
Right.
Because, we don't want people talking about my terrible, awful, monstrous son over and over again. So let's, pull some BS and make YouTube take these videos down illegally. But yeah, so like, I'm not surprised to hear that. Elliot Rodger's dad was kind of a Hollywood.
Well, here's where it gets.
He was well established.
Here's where it gets spicier. So Elliot Rodger's father asked Dale Launer to talk to Elliot and give him advice on how to be confident with women.
Yes, my 60-year-old screenwriter friend. I'm sure he can help you get the ladies.
Which that to me is just like, dude, why would you do that? That to me, that just sounds weird. That's odd and weird, and it leaves me feeling icky, but it just does.
This is a funny tangent to get off on this movie. I never would have, in my wildest dreams, thought we would be talking about Elliot Rodger on this podcast, let alone on this episode of this podcast.
This came up during my research.
But bringing up him, there's tons of info and stuff, but mixed in, like, just from what I know about his manifesto and his family history and stuff, like, the dude, first off, I am pretty sure he had something wrong with him from the get-go. Like, I think he might have been on the spectrum, or like he had issues socializing, just period. He's talked about as much in his little manifesto with, like, even as a baby, he had issues like making eye contact with people and not feeling. So, like, hearing that, it's like everyone's like, who to blame? I don't think his parents did him any favors. I don't think either of them were very adept at helping him with his social problems.
Right.
And what you are telling me right now is a perfect example. I can imagine what that screenwriter must have felt when some friend of his is like, hey, my son is having trouble talking to girls. Can you, like, why me, buddy? Like, I'm like middle-aged. I've got grandkids. Like, the fact that you would need to, like, have like a business friend talk to your own kid about, like, why aren't you talking to your kid?
Right.
Frankly, that's so weird. Like, if anything, I feel kind of bad for the screenwriter, because it's like, what? Imagine being in his shoes.
He ended up writing an article for BBC about it entitled "How I Tried to Help Elliot Rodger."
I am reading that as soon as we get off of it, because I need to hear.
Well,
here's the thing,
and we're going to get back onto the movie in a minute, because that's not the point of this, but it was just, when I like true crime, I love reading about true crime and learning what makes people do things. So when this popped up, I kind of, did a quick dive into it. So he agrees with you, though, when you said there was something else wrong. He said, you were hoping that inside there was this normal kid wanting to come out, that he would overcome his shyness and bloom in some way. What became evident was that he was actually hiding was this horribly twisted little monster. So even he thought there was stuff odd about him.
As I said, like, it's his manifesto is pretty enlightening as far as, like, his history, his childhood and stuff like that. The problem with him, and who knows where he got this. It might have just been ingrained in him, or it was taught to him by his wealthy, famous parents, but he had a sense of entitlement.
Yeah.
The world owed him these things because he was good looking and he was wealthy. And that's kind of where the problem in his twisted little mind, got sucked into like he deserved all these things. And that's where the question lies, right? Where did he get that idea? Is it because of how he was raised? Is it because he grew up wealthy in the Los Angeles area? Did his parents instill in him that he was owed things because of his status? And who knows? But it is, as I said, I'm glad you brought that up because now I've got something interesting to read. And again, it's like, I'm not surprised. Like I said 5 minutes ago before you even mentioned that, it's like, well, imagine being in his shoes, especially knowing what Elliot's like, now. Could you imagine like a friend from work, like asking you to talk to their teenage son about like, dating, and then you sit down with them and they're a little weirdo. Like
so the whole thing just creeps me out just a little bit. Like, I don't like, there's nothing wrong with it, but something about just having this father be like, yeah, I talked to my son about dating and girls. That for some reason that just weirds me out and it makes me very uncomfortable.
As I said, like when you brought that up, the red flag to me is, why isn't his own father talking to him about this stuff?
Right.
Why are you bringing in some screenwriter? It's freaking weird.
Anyway, again, back on topic of the movie. Okay, so you talked about how fabulous Bette Midler was in this movie, and she was great.
She's good in everything, man. She's especially in comedies. That woman is very funny.
Yeah, she does have. She's very gifted with comedic timing, and that's not.
Well, like something I feel like people don't talk about enough. I've brought it up when we've reviewed Jim Carrey movies, but like I feel like having very animated facial expressions. Mm-hmm. Like having just a very animated kind of like exaggerated sort of performance. And she's really good with that in this, especially like she's fighting back as she's getting kidnapped. She's like kicking the guy in the stomach and all this stuff. And when she's talking, it's very, blah, like, it's hard to explain, but it's the same in Hocus Pocus. Like she's very good at being just kind of over the top.
Yeah.
Like whether it's a witch or whether it's like kind of a angry, naggy sort of wife or something. Like I haven't seen her in too many other movies, but I would imagine that she's good in that same sort of way. I think it also kind of comes from being like a musical performer. Yeah. Like you have to have some charisma when you're some animation. The singer. Exactly. Like you really gotta, everyone in the back row can feel the energy too. So I feel like she brings that a lot to her acting performance.
Right. And then, so imagine now her not being in the movie, and instead we have, wait for it, Madonna.
Boo! Boo! Not just because it's not Bette Midler, but that makes no damn sense. Madonna was still like young and pretty, and like again, like the character is like this, at the point she's kidnapped, she's overweight. She's like middle-aged, just like her husband. Like she's not as pretty as she used to be. Like that makes no sense for Madonna. Madonna was like not even 30 years old, I don't think, when this movie came out. That would like, I could see her being a trophy wife, but then the whole bit about like waiting for her father to die or whatever doesn't make any sense. Like, because then she's the rich one and he is the one that, that makes, who was it? Michael Eisner? Whose idea was it to?
I don't know whose idea it was, but she left over quote unquote creative differences with the directing team.
Good. She's, I sound mean. She's not bad. Like, in fact, one of your favorite movies is Evita. Yeah. No problem with Madonna. I just really do not think having her in that movie would have made any sense logically.
I don't think she's a comedic actress.
That too. I think she takes herself too seriously to be funny.
I'm just trying to imagine, and I can't see it. And I'm kind of wondering if the quote unquote creative differences were, they were like, oh, Madonna and she's going to play the role. And they were just like, no. I wonder if that's what the creative difference was.
I'd be curious. Who knows if she even remembers at this point, but I would be curious too. I hope it was just someone had a, lapse of good judgment. Because again, it makes no sense. Like for the character that was written in the scripts, again, it's like she's got to be someone that a scummy person like Danny DeVito would be, not Danny DeVito the person, but his character, would be like not interested in being with anymore. In fact, that's kind of even a point at the end of the movie after she lost all that weight.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he's like, "Oh, baby, you're looking pretty good." You know, it's like that's the whole point. She's older. She let herself go, and so he's cheating on her because he just, you know, he could get someone better. So again, like unless you were planning on putting Madonna in like a fat suit or something, and aging her artificially, just makes no sense.
Well, actually,
like, casting.
I'm glad you brought up the thing about, you know, her looking great, because if you really think about it, you know, because there's always this problem in this trope with a lot of rom-coms where they, you know, fix themselves up for somebody else. You know, if you really think about it, in this movie, she got herself into shape for herself, basically. She didn't do it for anybody else.
Well, I think it was also, I do agree. I think part of it was also because she wanted to escape. She was like, I'm going to get so strong, I'm going to rip these chains off the bed.
But the point is she did it for herself. And for the time, that's a pretty progressive and important message. And I really like that. And she didn't go crawling back to this guy.
For sure. That's one loose end I kind of was expecting them to do something with that they never did. And I feel like the movie would have been a little bit better if like the husband or something had published like the kidnapping diet workout book or something like that. You know, like his wife had the fashion thing going on or whatever, but I'm surprised they didn't like, or maybe the wife wrote it or something, like the you know, writing a book on how you can lose 20 pounds in 7 days by chaining yourself to a bed and just like eating only like fruit salad.
I would love that if Bette Midler's character was like, I did it and so can you.
As I said, I'm surprised that wasn't like a thing in the credits. Like, you know, like as the credits are rolling, it's like an infomercial about her weight loss book or something. I was expecting that to be the case, and then I was very surprised and a little disappointed when that didn't turn out to do anything by the end of the movie.
Right. Well, so we're getting ready to our closing points. So, final thoughts and rating on your end.
So this movie is exactly the reason why I suggested, you know, whatever, like the beginning of the year. I think we started doing it around this time last year, doing the rating system, because before it was like, you know, oh, do you recommend it or do you not? And for a long time it was like, oh, I recommend it.
It's too vast and too generic.
You can guess, and part of it's also you and I don't want to be jerks. Like, you know, just because a movie's not that good, it's like we don't want to be like, oh, I don't recommend it because the costumes look fake or something. So, you know, we decided to go to a rating system, one, to make fun of Siskel and Ebert because they had their famous 4-star rating system, and I think no one uses 4. It's either 5 or 10 or 100.
Right.
You know, it's stupid, and you always forget every time we rate at the end.
Like,
I don't even blame you because who uses?
How many stars?
It's 4. And you can remember just because it's the stupidest number you could use for a rate. Anyway,
it would only be worse if they made it 7.
I don't know. It's so funny too. Like for the longest, my dad, like he'd always say, like we'd go somewhere or see a movie or something and be like, "Oh, how'd you like it? 4 stars." And I'd be like, "What's wrong with it?" He's like, "What do you mean? 4 stars is perfect." I'm like, 5 stars is perfect. What are you talking about? I don't know. Yeah, and it's like Siskel and Ebert, and he's not wrong. Like it's because for, you know.
And you're just like, however
long that they were on.
Unless this restaurant was doxing people, we don't use that system.
Right? It's just, anyway, so for a lot of people like who watched a lot of them in the 60s or in the 70s and 80s and whatever, it's like, oh, 4 stars makes sense. Anyway, this movie is the reason we switched to a rating system, because I don't hate this movie. I don't think it's really like it's good. It's a good comedy. It doesn't really excel in the places that generally interest me. It's very well written and the cast is perfect. Like I mostly talked about Danny DeVito and Bette Midler, but Judge Reinhold was really funny. He's one of those actors you don't really see a lot after the 80s, but he was known for being kind of comedic, and he was really great in the role. His wife, I forgot the actress's name, but she was really good too. Everyone was really good. Honestly, like this for me is a 2 out of 4. It's good, but not amazing. Like it hits all of the right notes. It might appeal to someone else more than me,
Right.
just depending on your sense of humor.
Yeah, it's just not,
But I
basically, it's just not
do,
your genre.
yeah. Frankly, like the Zucker brothers have made better movies for my comedy sensibilities, so it doesn't really excel there. On the filmmaking end of things, you can kind of feel that the budget was smaller than
Right.
usual. Again, it feels kind of like a 90-minute sitcom, which isn't bad. Uh, I'm not even really suggesting like, oh, this should have been a TV movie or something. No, it's not like poorly made. It just you can kind of feel that corners were cut. So this is for me, 2 out of 4. It's good but not amazing.
Really quick question. I just remembered this. When I said this is the last film they directed as a trio, and you were like, yeah. Were you expecting me to say it didn't do well?
Sort of. I like again. I had said blockbuster comedy on Amazon, so I assumed it did
Yeah.
well. I just was like, and sometimes even after something successful, again, like I was kind of thinking, oh, at some point they split up and started not doing so well
Right.
or whatever. So I was thinking, oh, maybe the one after this is when they started going downhill. I don't know,
Yeah.
but like that is actually because I feel like it was still the three of them on all Naked Gun movies. So again, now I'm gonna like go into a Zucker Brothers rabbit hole and try and figure out when their career started going downhill. But yeah, I don't know. This is interesting. This is besides this being the type of movie that the rating system was based off of. This is also like my favorite type of movie for you to recommend because I've never heard of this.
Yeah.
Was not aware that this was a thing at all.
This
so.
was a big enough deal that when it was still in the theaters, it was name dropped on the Golden Girls. They said, "What do you mean you're excited his wife's dead?" And Sophia's like, "Well, it's Freddie, and he has nothing to do now, and neither one of us has seen Ruthless People." Like this was a big enough deal, like that it got shoehorned essentially into an active script.
Gotcha. And I mean, it is funny too. Like, I mean, Touchstone was Disney's adult, which it's funny. Like history repeating itself. Now Disney owns 20th Century Fox, and that's kind of becoming
That's their adult centric.
And they still use Touchstone every once in a while. But now 20th Century Fox is kind of like it's mind blowing. But like that new Predator movie is technically a Disney movie. It's just released through 20th Century Fox because it doesn't ruffle feathers when it's released under the same production company that it was released on before, so that's kind of what has become Disney's adult. And that too, like they even announced like when the merger happened, like Deadpool is a really popular comic book character. His movies are rated R, and that was something Disney was like, don't worry, at Deadpool, we're not gonna, castrate him. He's still gonna be very raunchy. We're not going to like Disneyfy all of the superheroes just because we own them now. So
I mean, low-key, I would love to see what that looked like.
I'm excited to see Deadpool eventually end up in the theme parks because my guess is it'll probably be like, you got to keep it PG-13. Like you can be witty, like you can suggest very adult things without like full on using curse words or whatever. But I guarantee that, like, it's like Jack Sparrow. When he was added to Disney parks, I was incredibly interested to see what that was going to be like because he was a much more adult character than anything that they'd done before. And it's funny. Like, they keep it so he's not doing anything too risque, but he'll just be acting drunk in the middle of the park, and it's kind of hilarious. I once was at Disneyland and watched him just like follow a group of like, like a family for like all the way down to like Adventureland because like he was just being goofy. So I don't know, but it is interesting that this is technically a Disney movie because there is just full on nudity, lots of curse words, and it's not like new for them.
Well, my favorite part is if you Google Ruthless People, one of the results is watch Ruthless People full movie Disney Plus. It's not on Disney Plus, but for some reason they have it on their website.
So do you know the same thing happened last episode? And you know why is because last episode it was a 20th Century Fox film.
That's true. But that's a PG movie.
So fun fact. Well, it was, but my point is like we didn't talk about this on the last episode, I don't think, but I had a really hard time finding that movie streaming. Like King Comedy, for some reason, no one wants to stream it right now. And what was funny was when I was Googling where to watch it, it came up on Disney Plus, and I was like, oh, really? And it made sense because I saw, oh, it's 20th Century Fox. Wasn't available in my territory. So somewhere it is streaming on Disney Plus, and I bet it could be the same thing with this movie because they do have a bunch of other Touchstone films on Disney Plus. But yeah,
well,
there you go.
And listeners, last time he texted me literally as I was watching the movie, and is like, "Hey, let's skip it over," and I'm like, "Dude, you made me sit through a Scorsese film for nothing." No,
it's because. This was supposed to be, and maybe we'll discuss it in the future, but it's like, when is something not just streaming on Amazon for rental? It was like, I waited till the last minute because I wanted it to be fresh in my mind. And it's not a film that people think of when they think of Scorsese, but it's not like a bomb.
Right.
It's not like, so I was like, it's got to be somewhere. Of course it isn't. And that was the thing too. After that, when you told me what we were watching this episode, I immediately was like, where is it? Because I don't want to have the same thing happen to me.
Well, like, it was funny because we couldn't find it either, and my brother has us all interconnected on his Apple library, and he just buys basically everything. And we're like, let's see if he has it. Oh, yeah, he has it. Okay, we'll watch it this way. But anyway, so my rating for this movie, I'm going to give this 2.5 pitchers of sweet tea out of 4. And the reason I'm not giving it 3 stars is because I do feel like, I mean, this is a movie I enjoy and I like watching, but I do feel like there were, especially towards the middle of the movie, I would say, there's a lot of missed opportunities for comedy. I know, like you had mentioned, with this being the Zuckers, they could have had, some background gags or something. It wasn't unenjoyable in the middle, but I just feel like there was a drop off in comedy in the middle. And I feel like if they had filled that in, I would have given it a 3.
Oh, yeah. Well, the other thing, it's in my notes and I never really touched on it. It's not a massive thing, but compared to their other movies or just other comedies, this one feels really kind of like, I'm going to say dated, but not in the sense like, oh, the comedy is not funny anymore. No, I mean, like, it feels like it came out in 1986. Like the music sounds like 80s music. A lot of the, like, God, now that I'm thinking of their mansion, it's like, no wonder I didn't recognize it in Moonlighting, because in Moonlighting it was dressed like a normal house. Like in the movie, it's got all this weird angular kind of art
stuff.
Hanging
it's
out.
It's just like the most 80s
Yeah.
It's the 80s threw up on the house.
Well, and her skirt that Danny DeVito stole was a spandex skirt. Very 80s. And then again, it's like when you see the styles that she's coming up with that Bette Midler really likes, it's like this very like what's that pop star from like Madonna comes to mind, but I'm thinking like Girls Just Want to Have
Cyndi
Fun,
Lauper.
like that kind
Cyndi
of
Lauper.
Cyndi Lauper, like it looks like something Cyndi Lauper would wear. And the movie's got a lot of stuff like that. Like even I don't think the main title theme and cartoon is like bad, but it's very 80s.
I just remember when I was watching this, and we have the reveal of the outfit she's been designing, and I was just like, Mom, this is objectively an ugly outfit. She's like, it was the 80s. It was the 80s. This is what people did.
So you know what I'm talking about. It's like there's lots of that in this movie where, again, it's like a lot of something. Literally the year before this came out, and it's not a comedy, it's more of an adventure, but like Back to the Future, it takes place in 1985, and that's like a big part of the story, but it doesn't feel like an 80s movie.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
No.
Like it feels pretty timeless. Like you can watch that today and like that it came out in 1985, but it doesn't just like steamroll everything else about the movie. So that is something I do kind of consider a flaw with this movie, and I don't know really who to blame for it. Maybe the art department or something, but it's like it just feels very much a part of its decade. It is
very much part of its decade, but I think that was on purpose because I have a feeling her character was supposed to be as tacky and gauche as possible. And just so you know, I did look it up. The design style featured in the house in Ruthless People that we all thought was ugly It's known as Memphis, a design movement that was popular in the 80s. So, in case you wanted to run out and have your home redone, make sure you ask for that Memphis style.
Would you like to lower the value of your home? Would you like to sell your home for less than you bought it?
Right? Especially now after everything's so inflated that if you sell it for less than you bought it, you're really doing something wrong. So, listeners, it has been a treat to take you down what is kind of a nostalgic movie for me, Ruthless People. And I am just glad, even though it wasn't his favorite, I'm glad that Whiskey liked it, because this is one I didn't know if you would enjoy it at all. Like, I was expecting you to come in and be like, what did you make me watch?
I like to think I'm pretty fair. Unless something's objectively bad, I'm not going to, like, really hate on it. It might just be something that's not for me. So I hope you know that I try to be fair with all
All right,
these.
next week, snuff films. I want to see you defend those.
So I like the weapon he was using. The wrench had a lot of heft to it. It made it just have this nice crunch when it... But anyway, thank you. But anyway, thank you all so very much for listening to yet another episode of our podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe and leave a comment and all that other stuff. If you're listening on any other platform, feel free to check out our backlog of episodes. We'd really appreciate it. And thank you again. Until next time, we've been Whiskey and Sweet Tea, keeping it Tino.
And suck it, Scorsese.
Peace.
Bye. Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is produced by Alejandro Castillo, edited by Andy Reisfeld, and features original artwork by Ace Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks, and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.